Hi, everyone, and welcome to the weekend. Welcome to Devil's Advocate on KBDI. And if you're looking at your television set right now and thinking, gosh, you know, the host of Devil's Advocate has a little bit more hair tonight than usual, you would be correct. Our typical host, John Caldera, we have given him the night off. I'm Todd Shepherd. I'm the investigative reporter and researcher with the Independence Institute, where it's been my great fortune to work for the last 2 or 3 years. Tonight on Devil's Advocate here on KBDI, we're going to talk about energy. So let's just take a quick second and step back and show you the scope of what we're going to talk about tonight. No, we're not going to go back so far as to talk about Jimmy Carter in a cardigan sweater saying the nation must turn down its thermostat. But we are going to talk specifically about the Colorado Public Utilities Commission and look at some trends and some transformations of the PUC over the last 4 or 5 years. And we're also going to look at some of the bills that have come out of the General Assembly more over the last 2 or 3 years. And believe me, folks, if this sounds esoteric to you right now, it's not. It's affecting everything you do in Colorado. It's affecting how you travel, when you travel, your gas prices. It's affecting your utility bills at home. It's affecting the utility bills of the business where you are buying your goods from. So it is impacting you in so many ways. So let's welcome in our guest tonight. To my left, Amy Oliver Cooke. And Amy is my colleague at the Independence Institute. Over the last couple of years, you've been doing a lot of transparency issues, but you've also, really for the last year and a half, you have been tracking energy specifically, right?
Yeah. About a year ago, what I knew about energy, you could have fit in a thimble. Well, they were looking for somebody to write on the new tiered rate structure that Xcel Energy recently implemented, courtesy of the Public Utilities Commission, which we will touch on. And I started writing about it just before that happened. So it's been about a year. My learning curve has been quite steep. And what I've realized is really legislation coupled with the Public Utilities Commission, coupled with an accommodating administration. Ratepayers in Colorado have seen a dramatic increase in their utility bills. If you are an Xcel Energy ratepayer, I am, so this affects me personally as well as public policy. And
remind me to touch on learning curve a little bit later in the show, because I think that's important, because sometimes we get into energy and it takes a while for even just the general public to get up to speed on terms like BTUs and all
acronyms,
the acronyms. The alphabet soup can be crazy sometimes. On my right, we're happy to have Polly Page. She is the director of the Colorado Consumer Coalition, and you've also been a board member of the PUC. Is that correct?
Oh, I was the commissioner on the PUC for 8 years.
And under whose administration?
Under Governor Owens' administration. And speaking of learning curve, the first, I mentioned everybody, the first 6 months I was on, I cried a lot. I thought, what have you done to yourself?
I mean, while you were at the board, or did you just go into a dark room somewhere?
I would go into the dark room. I wouldn't embarrass myself that bad, but it is amazing. The education it takes to even begin to understand what's going on there.
Right. Well, let's start off, first of all, tell me about the Colorado Consumer Coalition, who's a part of it, and what do you all aim to do? And if I found you on the web, would I be able to instantly identify you as a Democrat or a Republican type institution?
No, we're very much bipartisan. In fact, I think we're one of the few people that has the NFIB, which is the National Federation of Independent Businesses, and the unions both supporting us in our efforts. And I'm not the director. Bill Ray is the executive director, but I am a part of the coalition. And our goal is to educate people on what is happening on your energy bills, what it does to the economy, what it does to business. We have a very particular business in Boulder, NCAR, that moved their supercomputer to Cheyenne because of energy rates in Colorado. And
Wow.
that says a lot about, they'll employ 200 people up there. That's 200 jobs not in Colorado.
That's fascinating. When you say some unions are a part of the coalition, can you give me one or two examples?
Well, the mining, absolutely, union, and even grocery stores and people like that are a part of this.
Okay. Well, let's stay here with you for a second, and since you have that PUC experience. As Amy and I were talking about prior to the show, there's been, at least from her observations, and I confess I have not followed it as closely as she has. It would be difficult to, but we were talking about this sort of transformational shift over the last 3 or 4 years, and really what the PUC has seen as their mission. Is their mission to bring is their mission to be the protector for the consumers of Colorado, or
I think
explain that for
they've
me.
gotten away from that completely.
Okay, so when you say they've gotten away from it, what do you think it previously was? How do you think
least cost resource planning was what we dealt with. You know, you take all the facts, and then for the consumer's sake, you go to the least cost way of bringing that energy to the consumer. And that's the reason you regulate these industries, is so that they don't get carried away with themselves and just charge whatever they want, because they are a monopoly.
So even though they may not have had a mission statement, we could say that overall their guiding light was a least cost principle for the average Colorado consumer. Is that,
And
would that be
really,
accurate?
we did have kind of a mission statement
Okay.
that says that, and it was changed under Governor Ritter's administration. And
Interesting.
it went more to the clean air, green energy rather than consumers first. Now, that's my interpretation, so it doesn't state that specifically, but that's what it turned out to be. It's like in the initiative that people voted on, I mean, who wouldn't vote for 10%
Right.
clean air? It's like motherhood and apple pie, you
Right.
know? So, and then the legislature just kept upping it to 20 to 30%, and because they kind of commanded this on the Xcel, they also gave them the ability to recoup everything it cost
Yeah,
to
Amy,
make it happen.
Your observations on the commission?
Yeah, the mission statement prior to Governor Ritter taking office included affordable, abundant, and reliable energy. It now says something along the lines, and it's reasonably priced, consistent with the social, economic, and environmental values of the state of Colorado. That's a dramatic transformation.
That really is. I mean, when you consider a lot of, corporations or even government entities will spend months sometimes hashing out, over just one word. When you go from affordable to
We went affordable, abundant, reliable, to reasonably priced.
reasonable, that is a huge
No,
shift. I mean, you may laugh at it at home and say, well, that's not that big of a change.
No,
really, that is a seismic change
Yes.
in terms of what that agency can do then, and say we're still in with our mission statement.
And there's something else people need to understand too, is that utilities, for instance, like Xcel Energy, if they do well in the state of Colorado, it's because they enjoy favorable treatment. That is the economic reality of this monopoly, of this highly regulated monopoly. Essentially what you had was the Public Utilities Commission was supposed to be the watchdog for the consumer. There's supposed to be some kind of tension there. And this least cost principle, well, Xcel Energy is allowed to operate, and in return, and they're given a monopoly, and in return they get a basic rate of return. They can recover their cost and a little bit more. Well, frankly, you've had the Public Utilities Commission change their mission statement, and Xcel Energy willing to go along. There's nobody there for the ratepayer.
Right. So if we sort of shift away from the Utility Commission and how their broad changes have influenced the actual legislation that we've seen come out of the Gold Dome, let's start. I guess we would have to start with last year, the big 1365, which really gave a big shift to natural gas. Who would like to explain that for me and talk about? Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Can I back up a couple of years real quick?
I guess other than the renewable energy standards that Polly already mentioned.
There's renewable energy standards. There was one other piece of legislation, though, and that passed in 2008, House Bill 1164, and that allowed for a carbon tax in the state of Colorado.
Okay.
We're the only ones. And it was based on, they assumed that cap and trade would pass at the federal level. And assuming that it passed there, we were already going to take proactive steps, and we're going to have it here in Colorado. Well, what it did is it made coal very expensive.
Sure.
So you start there, and then you get to House Bill 1365.
And again, this was in the General Assembly of 2010.
That's right. So 2 years. 1164 was addressing carbon taxes and global warming and all that kind of stuff. But it actually sort of paved the way so that you could get to 1365, which is the fuel switching bill, which passed last year, which has a cost of about $1.4 billion on it. Now,
$1.4 billion over
about a 10-year period of time.
Okay.
The interesting thing about this, and Polly is probably the one who should probably get, is really the collusion that occurred. You had the Public Utilities Commission, which is supposed to be the watchdog for the consumers, drafting the legislation. They're part of the conversation, along with Xcel and the Ritter administration.
In your 8 years,
And gas.
Yeah,
in your 8 years, did you ever experience anything like that, where the members of the PUC were part and parcel of the drafting of the legislation?
No. And
Would you have even considered it?
no, in fact, we only went over to the legislators and communicated with them when we were invited. We went as a group to give them information. We always had an attorney and the executive director and all this good stuff. But they
Which
invited,
I'm sure is important. I mean, you're talking about sunshine laws, you're talking about open records possibility. I mean, especially sunshine laws where decisions could be reached not in front of the public.
Well, and we are always, when it came to something that would come like taxi cabs and things like that, they might ask advice on it, which made sense because the staff there
You're experts on it.
Yeah, we're
Right.
experts on it and could give them advice, but we never had a hand in writing the legislation that we would be implementing.
But through the Open Records Act, we know that is exact. Ron Benz and maybe someone else was directly involved in 1365 that shifted a lot of production to natural gas.
It was. And in fact, there is an email that reflects something along the lines, we've reached agreement with, and this is among all the parties. It's the oil and gas guys, or some of the natural gas producers, Xcel Energy, the Ritter administration, and the PUC. And we've reached agreement on, sort of rate of return, cost recovery. And I'm thinking, these people for whom this legislation is going to benefit are the ones writing the legislation, and the Public Utilities Commission is agreeing with it.
Guiding it.
Yeah, guiding
Yes.
it. Where is the ratepayer?
Right.
Where, and that has been the paradigm that has been perpetuated on the Colorado public, is that all of the stakeholders have been invited. Well, the coal industry wasn't exactly invited, and ratepayers have never been invited to participate.
From your experience at the PUC, is this something that could a lawsuit be brought against this? I mean,
Well, I always was told, and I believe, that the PUC is kind of a judicial body.
Okay.
And they are supposed to only make their decision on what they hear in the hearing and what evidence is provided, which is open to everybody.
Right.
It's not, I've already made the decision, let's just go through the motion here and I'll approve it.
So if the hearing were on this bill, I mean, we already know what their vote is because it was their handwriting.
In fact, the bill or the plan that Xcel put before them to meet 1365 was actually just kind of thrown out, and at the last minute, I mean, here you've had all this testimony and written testimony, I mean reams of written testimony, and arguing before the commissioners and all the things that have gone on, and then kind of at the decision-making point where the commissioners start talking about making a decision, they come up with this plan.
Right. The plan
that
they've been
got
overseeing.
approved.
Right.
And
let's go ahead and get back into the nuts and bolts of some of these bills. First of all, I want to make sure I understand what I think you were saying a little bit earlier about the carbon tax as it relates to the natural gas bill that we were just discussing. Was I hearing a sort of sequence of thinking from you that, well, we put the carbon tax out there, it makes coal more expensive. Once we make coal more expensive, it will be easier for the public to swallow if we say, here's a natural gas bill?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Coal is only more expensive because it has.
We made it so.
Yeah, we made it
by
so.
legislative fiat.
And in fact, what is interesting in Colorado is the carbon tax. They allow for a $20 a ton carbon tax on coal. Even when they were whispering at the federal level, the highest level they came up with, I think, was $12 a ton. Colorado allows for a $20 a ton carbon tax on coal.
So,
the other thing is Governor Ritter is on record as saying the only reason why coal is cheap, and he was the one instrumental in 1365. He said the only reason why coal is cheap is because we don't tax it enough. So
how horrible that something should be so abundant and so cheap.
And one of the things we should make clear about the Independence Institute, we are agnostic about resources. We don't care where the energy comes from.
Sure, if a solar panel could power a space shuttle to the moon, we would be all for
it.
it. I mean,
If it was affordable and reliable and abundant and it was market-based, great. We don't care.
Right.
But what is happening right now is the manipulation. It's not even a market, but they're even manipulating the monopoly.
Right.
And so yes. So what happened is you allowed for this carbon tax, which then made 1365, the fuel switching, seem more reasonable. And once you've done that, then renewable energy seems more reasonable because coal is so heavily taxed.
Right.
I mean, it's a domino effect.
Let's get into the SIP bill. And I know that, again, if...
I'm sorry for you.
Don't, yeah, good one. Play along. It's a drinking game at home. So, again, don't roll your eyes or don't let them glaze over yet, because, again, this if it doesn't impact you today, you're going to feel the impact of this very soon. Amy, give us an explanation of what SIP stands for and what it does.
I'll tell you real quickly. 2011, our conservative estimates, 2011.
2011 is the
No,
SIP.
I'm going to say this real quickly, and then we're going to add the SIP on top of it. Right now, a conservative estimate by the Independence Institute, 2011, if you're an Xcel ratepayer, 4 pieces of legislation prior to the SIP that we're going to touch on, 4 pieces of legislation will add 8% to your utility bill. That is based...
How soon?
This year.
Okay.
8%, based on Xcel's filings with the PUC. 8%. Now you throw on the tiered rates, which we haven't even touched on. It's going to get more expensive. But the SIP plan, the State Implementation Plan on Regional Haze, which is required under House Bill 1365, which is this plan that the plan itself is 170 pages long. When you throw in all the supporting documents, it's about 1,900 pages long. What you have are legislators passing this legislation that allows Xcel Energy to recover another $1 billion from ratepayers over the next 10 years. It's one of these things we have to implement it to see what's in it.
Recover what exactly? Just the costs of reducing haze?
Right. Right. Of this
decaview.
Yeah, one. Yeah, what is it? A decaview? A deciview? I mean, nobody can even define it. It is
at Mountain Circle.
It's an aesthetic.
So
plan.
the measurement has to be taken at a specific point. Is
yes.
it? Oh, okay. So,
on some of it, yes, it does. There are different spots.
And the State Implementation Plan, which is what this is called for regional haze, it's House Bill 1291.
Is this linked to any sort of federal mandate or legislation at all?
Well, reasonably foreseeable. So you have to be a soothsayer. You have to actually.
And you have to believe in a proactive legislative pro-EPA Congress?
Right. Well,
yes.
you have to believe in that, and then you have to
trade.
go above and beyond it, because the state of Colorado's, what is being implemented in this plan is greater than anything that the Environmental Protection Agency has ever even dreamed up.
Wow.
They even include plants that were illegal to include them and had to have some kind of exemption by the legislature to say, okay, you can include these plans.
Now, you mentioned was it how many billion? 10?
$1 billion
$1 billion
over the next 10 years.
10 years.
But you add that on top of all of the other legislation, you were talking about a substantial increase in your utility bills, which that's not just for residential, that's for,
right.
I mean, the trickle down.
Exactly. I mean, and again, just to reiterate, to drive the point home, what you were saying is there's the 8% increase that Xcel customers are going to see first.
Right.
That's before the recovery of the $1 billion even begins.
Over the next 10.
How soon will that recovery begin? Do you know, Polly?
I don't really.
Okay.
I'm sure that it'll come in with the next rate plan.
Okay.
Because they do have to file rate plans And a lot of things go on there, but to recover all this, it has to be through that.
But like Amy was just saying, there's that trickle down.
Yes.
And as we all know, businesses rarely absorb
That's right.
the entire cost of these
Absolutely.
expenses to their business. So what are you hearing from the members of your coalition? And I mean, like, that's a great example you had at the beginning of the show. We actually moved our computers up into Wyoming.
Right.
But what other things are you hearing from your or your coalition?
The people at Rocky Mountain Steel are saying we're in a world competitive market.
Right.
You're
We're
pricing
competing against China where
Yes.
there's no carbon tax.
You're pricing us out of the market. The same thing with Climax. You know, these high energy users are, you know, they don't know what their future is when they look at what these bills are
Right.
and how long their jobs can stay and make it in Colorado. So there's a big concern there, not by just the companies that own these, but by the people that work there and the unions that support those people. It is amazing. But it also just goes right down to the little mom and pop liquor store who has to keep a refrigerated beer going,
Sure.
you know, so, and that just goes through the roof.
Or, you know, and it may be not exactly the most politically correct industry, but as Vincent Carroll pointed out in a blog item recently, the medical marijuana, I mean, to actually grow marijuana, it takes an inordinate amount of electricity.
Energy,
I mean,
yes.
the lights, the conditioning, and cycling of the water. So even that industry, I'm sure that there would be a bottom line on that. Amy, you mentioned some other bills a little while ago. Take me through a couple and their consequences. Yeah,
Well,
if you can pick just two out of the sand of
well, we
multitude.
mentioned 1365, which is the fuel switching, but a couple of other ones. One of the things that is coming up, and actually this wasn't a bill, but it is something that ratepayers have to endure, and it's the tiered rate structure.
Sure.
And it was enabled by the PUC. Xcel Energy is allowed to charge double if you go above a certain threshold. And that threshold is so low.
It's very low.
It's 500 kilowatt
Right.
hours. The average residential usage is 687. And there are, I mean, that varies 635 or 687. The point being they capture most residential users.
Right.
And I watched my bill because I have a fairly large family. We have a large home to accommodate our large family. My energy usage, because we had a couple of extra house guests last summer, went up. My energy usage went up 10%. My utility bill went up 61%.
Wow.
Now, that is less discretionary income that I have, but if you were on a fixed income, or if your utility bills, if you're cutting it close every month, now you're deciding between your medicine and your utility bill.
Now, in terms of those tiered rates, though, and Paula, you would know about this, businesses are exempt, isn't that
Yes,
correct?
that's just on residents.
Because
Right.
just for the kicks of it, as an investigative reporter, I went to the governor's office and I wanted to see the difference in usage, or actually I wanted to see the difference in the bills, the dollar amount of the bills at the governor's mansion. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite so cut and dried, and of course they do a lot of events there, so it was very difficult to compare an apple to an orange, but it would have been interesting to see if the governor had actually cut back on his usage. I can tell you that from my concern at my household, I live in maybe 1,900 square feet, that's maybe overguessing it, and obviously they're trying to get you to conserve energy, which is okay, but my poor fish, they stayed in the dark that whole summer, right? I mean, the aquarium lights never came on. My poor fish were in the
I
dark
think Pete
the
is after
whole
you.
summer long.
Pete is after you.
I would like to mention, though, Amy and I testified on about 4 bills. One, we thought was just a slam dunk that it would take off that carbon tax because it never came down from the feds.
Oh, right.
And it was just voted down without any, I don't know, you just felt like it was a given.
Party line vote or?
Oh, no. And there was a bill, 2 bills the other day. One would have taken Comanche 4, and let it run on coal, but with scrubbers and everything, which would have met the air quality, saved $130 million. No.
Wow.
And then Lundberg presented a bill that would take the Hayden costs out from $140 million
When you
down
say
to
Hayden costs, what are those?
it's 2 coal-fired plants
Okay.
in Hayden,
Okay.
and would have taken those costs from $140 million down to $20 million, another $120 million for consumers to save. No. They just left it. They said, oh, we'll have to start all over. I just don't think that's true. Here are just obvious bills to save the
money.
consumers money, and it just went down.
We're down to our last couple of minutes, so Amy, in 1 minute, can you maybe touch on what's some of the upcoming legislation, and what's also a way that maybe someone can follow energy without feeling like they're sort of drowning in that alphabet soup in that ocean?
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, right.
I'll tell you what, we write a lot at energy.i2i.org.
Okay.
Energy.i2i.org. And then Polly at the Colorado Consumer Coalition. Polly and I have become friends over testifying. That's how we got to know each other. But I would say this, the biggest concern, I think until ratepayers actually revolt against this, the General Assembly right now is enabling Xcel Energy.
When you say the General Assembly, are you talking about any particular caucus?
I'm talking about pretty much the entire House, with the exception of 7, and then the Democrats in the Senate. There are Republicans in the Senate, and there are a handful of Republicans in the House that have been fighting this, but you can't. Xcel Energy enjoys great favor at the state capitol.
Polly, 1 minute left. We talked about the shift in the PUC. If the PUC were to get back to sort of its nonpartisan and original mission statement of the least cost principle, how would that have to happen? Would it have to be through Governor Hickenlooper?
Oh, absolutely. But it's also, there's a catch in there, and I'm not sure about what you all have to go through. But, going back on a former commission's decision is not allowed sometimes, so they would have to change it going forward. And I'm sure that would be very hard, but possible, but it would require a different plan, a different goal, and say, let's just go back to affordable, reliable energy, least cost.
Lois Trop should be mentioned too.
Polly Page,
absolutely.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Amy Oliver Cooke, it's been a pleasure. Catch us next weekend, Devil's Advocate on KBDI, where you will get to hear from Pam Benigno as she talks about online education. I'm Todd Shepherd filling in for John Caldera. It's been a pleasure, folks. This is Devil's Advocate on KBDI.